Hello, welcome to RAD Academy. So today we are going to look at accounting accounting for overheads, a very simple topic in cost accounting for overhead. So under this topic, we are going to look at the meaning of overheads. We are going to look at the meaning of overheads. Then we look at the types of overheads. Then we look at allocation of overheads. Then we look at the apportionment. The apportionment of overheads. We look at the apportionment. Then we come to the absorption of overheads. These are the stages. Then we look at the apportion of overheads or a service department if there is a service department that is assisting the production department, we need to make some apportioning. Then lastly, we look at the concept of over and under absorption. So I'll take you through the theory of the accounting for overheads. Then after that, I'll take questions and solve with you for you to appreciate this topic. So let's start with the meaning of overheads. When we say overheads refers to all costs that cannot be traced directly to a particular product or service. That is overheads. So indirectly, we are trying to say overheads are all indirect costs. Because with indirect costs, you can't trace it to a particular good or product. That is overhead. So overheads are all. So when we say overheads, refers to all costs that cannot be traced or attributed to the production of goods and services or any cost center. So that is overheads. That is overhead. Overheads are costs that cannot be traced or attributed to the production of goods and services. That is overheads. So when it comes to overheads, as I said, overheads are all indirect costs. Overheads are all indirect costs. So that is overheads. So under overheads, it is grouped into three. For you to get your total overheads, it is grouped into three. That is your indirect material, your indirect material, then your indirect labor, then your what? Indirect expenses. Indirect expenses. So all this is what we say what? Overheads. This is what we say. That's why I said all indirect costs are what? Overheads. That is overhead. So when you come, overheads are grouped into two. They are grouped into two. So grouped into two, that is the production overheads and the non-production overheads. That is, we have indirect costs that are for the production department, and we have indirect costs that are not for the production department. So we have the production overheads and what? So overheads are grouped into two. That is the production overheads and what? The non-production overheads. When we talk about the production overheads, what do we mean by that? When we talk about the production overheads, they are overheads that are incurred in the production process. So during your production of your goods and services, the indirect cost that you incur in the production process, that is what we see. It is what? Production overheads. That is what we see as what? Production overheads. So let's say, for example, indirect materials. That is the indirect materials that you are using to produce your goods and services. That indirect materials is classified under what? Production overhead. So, for example, when you have your stationery, you have your fuel for the machine, operating the machine, all these are indirect what? Material. You can't attribute this um these expenses to a particular cost unit or what? Cost and supplies. It could be that in the office. So, for example, with office supplies or office stationery, it could be that we have like five departments in the building, and everyone there is using the stationery and what? The office supplies. So, with this one, with these expenses, you can't say that you are attributing the cost of these indirect materials to only one department. So since we can't attribute it to only one department, then we say it is what? Indirect material. Or for example, fuel. The fuel that we are using to operate the machine is used to produce, let's say, three products. Since we can't attribute the cost of the fuel to only one product, then we say it is what? Indirect what? Material. Then we move to another example for production overheads is what? The indirect what? Labor. Example is salaries of supervisors. Salaries of supervisors. So if the supervisor is supervising three products or supervising three centers, then you can't attribute the cost of this supervisor to only one center. That is why we say it is what? Indirect labor. And this supervisor helps in the production of goods and what? Services. That is why we classify the salaries of supervisors under what? Production overheads. Then we move to the indirect expenses. Indirect expenses. Example is the depreciation and also factory rent. These are costs that are incurred in the production process. These are costs that are incurred in the production um, process. So the machine that you are using, it will definitely, the machine that you are using to produce your goods and services, it will definitely what? Depreciate. And in accounting, the depreciation is classified as what? As cost. Depreciation is under what? Production overheads. Then we have what? Factory rent. Factory rent, that is when you rent your factory for your production, or is part of the production process. So any rent that is the factory rent is classified as what? The production overheads. That's good. So then we move to the non-production overheads. So when we move to the non-production overheads, the non-production overheads are overheads that have no bearing on the production process. They do not form part of the cost of the product. Since they are incurred after production has taken place, that is the non-production overheads. That is, the cost is incurred after production has already taken place. It is not occurred in the production process. So after we've produced our goods and now we have our final product, now the cost that we will incur after getting our final product, and we can't trace it to a particular cost unit or cost center, that is what we term as what? The non-production overheads. So for example, we have selling and distribution expenses. Selling and distribution expenses. So now you have your final product. The cost that you incur, the expenses that you incur in selling your product. So let's say you have like three products and you are selling them. The cost that you incur to sell all these three products, three different products, that cost is incurred. You can't trace that, the cost that you incur, you can't trace it to a particular item, because the items are what? The three different items are three, and you can't trace it to only one. So it is what? Indirect. Since you can't trace it to only one cost unit, it is what? Indirect. So if it is indirect, then it is an overhead. So these ones are called what? Non-production overheads. They are the overheads that are incurred after production has already taken place. And when the production overheads are the costs incurred in the production process. That is the difference between these two. I hope you get it. Okay, so let's move to the next one. Then we move to, let's move to the stages of overheads. Let's move to the stages of overheads. So when it comes to overheads, there are three stages. There are three stages. The first stage is what? The allocation of overheads. Then we have the apportionment. Then the third one, we have what? The absorption. Okay, so I'll take this one after the other and explain it to you. So here, for the apportionment, we also have and reapportionment. We have the apportionment and reapportionment. I will explain that to you. So let's pick the allocation of overheads. When we talk about the allocation of overheads, It is the allotment in one whole, an indirect expense to a single cost center or cost unit. So with the allocation of overheads, the allocation of overheads is where we are allotting the cost to only one cost unit. Only one cost unit. So allocation is the process by which the whole cost item are charged direct to a cost unit. That is allocation. Allocation is charging the cost to one cost unit. I hope you get this. So this is where we charge the cost to only one cost unit or one cost center. So with this indirect cost, you can actually trace it directly to that cost unit or that cost center. So for example, let's say if we have a supervisor who is supervising one particular department, and in that department they produce three products. So with since the supervisor is supervising only that department, then we can say we can trace the salary of the supervisor to that particular department. So since we are traced, we can charge the cost of the supervisor to that part that particular department only, then we say it is what? Allocation. So allocation is the process of charging the cost to only one cost unit or what? One cost center. That is allocation. Then apportionment comes in when you can't trace it to only one cost unit or one cost center. That is when you trace, you can see that the cost is for two or more cost units or cost center. That is where the apportionment comes in. So simply, the apportionment means that sharing. So when you trace the cost to the items, you can see that you can charge it to two or more cost units or cost center. That is where the apportionment comes in, or that is where the sharing comes in. Because, for example, if I'm in the same room with my roommate and we are all supposed to pay electricity bills. We are all using the lights, we are all using the fridge in the room. So at the end of the day, the cost of the electricity bill that will come, I will not be the only one to pay for the electricity bill because both of us are using it. So with this one, we need to do what? We need to apportion it. We need to what? We need to share it. But then if I'm the only one using, I'm only one in the room and the electricity bill comes, then it means I'm the only one going to pay. That is what? Allocation. But then if you guys are two or more in the room and the electricity bill is in, we can't trace the electricity bill to only one person since two or more people are using the electricity. Therefore, we need to do what? We need to do apportionment. Or we need to do what? We need to share. That is the meaning of apportionment. So you need to note that where the cost involved relates to more than one department, then apportionment comes in. But then if it is only one department or one cost unit, then we say what? Allocation. Allocation. So that is it. I hope this is clear. If you have any, you are not getting it, just put it in the comment section and I'll attend to that. Then let's move to the apportionment, overall apportionment. Overall apportionment. So as I said, The apportionment is used where overhead costs cannot be allocated to a particular cost center. It cannot be allocated to a particular cost center. So apportionment involves spreading indirect expenses to two or more cost centers or departments using the appropriate basis. Using the appropriate basis. So with the apportionment, you can't just say that um, we are sharing it equally. There should be an appropriate basis for sharing this cost. There should be an appropriate. So, if, for example, I'm in a room with my roommate and my roommate is having two fridges and I'm having one fridge. My roommate is having a television and I'm not having a television. At the end of the day, if the electricity bill is out, you don't expect me to pay equally as my roommate who has two fridges and I'm having one fridge. It wouldn't be fair that we are paying equally. So there should be an appropriate basis for what? Sharing what? The cost. There should be an appropriate basis for sharing the cost. So that is where we can say, okay, you have two fridge, I have one fridge. Then you have this, you have this. So what we have to do is we are going to share the electricity bill 2:3 based on the fridge that you have. Maybe you have two fridges, I have one fridge. So it depends. So when it comes to this, then it depends on the company what they will, the appropriate basis they would like to use to share what or to make the apportionment of the indirect cost to various cost units or cost center. So that is it. That is it. So one thing that I also want to talk about is the overhead analysis sheet. The overhead analysis sheet. So when we talk about the overhead analysis sheet, the record used for making overhead analysis is generally what we refer to as what the overhead analysis sheet. So the sheet that we make all the overhead analysis on. That this is the overhead, this is the production overheads, this is the non-production overheads, and we do the apportionment, we do the allocation, we do the absorption. That sheet that we do all those analysis on is what we call as what the overhead analysis sheet. That is all. Then let's move to some of the bases for apportionment. What are some of the bases that um, companies that produces goods and services use for the apportionment? So basis for apportionment. Basis for apportionment. So one. So what if there is an indirect cost of rent and rate? That is the overhead. And the basis of apportionment. So with rent and rate, mostly they use the floor area occupied. Floor area occupied. Floor area occupied. So for example, if the company has rent the rent this whole building, and the business let's say the accounting department has occupied this area and the science department has also occupied this area. This area is for the, let's say, business, and here is for the science, and here is for the IT, and let's say here is for art, and let's say here is for agric. So if the total rent and rate for this whole building is, let's say, 100,000 Ghana cedis, you wouldn't expect that this portion that is occupied by the business department and this portion occupied by the act department, they should be paying the same amount as the science department, which are occupying almost half of the floor area. So it wouldn't be fair. So if they are saying that at the end of the year, this company is supposed to pay 100,000 as rent and rate, it wouldn't be fair that since they should everyone all the departments should pay equally. It wouldn't be fair because when you look at this, you can see that science is occupying half of the floor area. So if let's say if the floor area is 10, the floor area is 10. Let's assume the floor area is 10 and science is occupying 5. Business is occupying 1. Art is also occupying 1, and agric is occupying 2, and IT is also occupying 1, which will give you this. So what the company will do is they are going to use the floor area as the basis for what apportionment for the rent, so that we know that okay, for science you are going to pay this amount of money. So what they will do is, so since science is the total floor area is 10 and science is occupying 5, then we say science, then you are supposed to pay out of the 100,000 Ghana cedis as rent and rate. Then science is going to pay 5/10 times the rent and rate, which is what 100,000. So we cancel these two, we cancel 1 year, we cancel 1 year, then we will get 50,000, which means for the cost of rent and rate, science is going to pay 50,000. Agric is occupying 2. So we say 2/10 times 10,000 means agric is going to pay 20,000. Then it means ICT is going to pay 10,000, business is going to pay 10,000, art is going to pay 10,000, making a summation of what 100,000. So here the floor area is the basis for what apportionment of the rent and rate. So in most questions, some of the questions will tell you to use the floor area occupied as the basis. So depending on the question that you have, sometimes the question will give you that you use this as the basis for apportionment. But then in case the question don't give you and the question is just saying that find the cost that is supposed the find the cost attributed for this find the cost. If the question don't give you any basis for apportionment and you see rent and rate, the best basis for apportionment that you can use for rent and rate is what? Floor area occupied. Let's move to another one. So let's say we have lightning. We have lightning. So lightning 2, we use the floor area occupied. Floor area occupied. So it depends on the question. Some of the questions will ask you to use the number of bulbs or this, but then if you don't see anything like number of bulbs or number of this, then the best basis for apportionment that you can use for lightning is what? Floor area occupied. Okay, then we move to the third one. Then we can say insurance. So when you have insurance of buildings, that is if the company has insured this whole building, what is the cost? When the cost comes, then the best basis for apportionment is what? Floor area occupied. Floor area occupied. That is it. Then let's say we have depreciation of machine. Depreciation of machine. So when you have depreciation of machine, the basis for apportionment is the cost or the book value of the machine. That is the basis for apportioning depreciation of a machine. Also, if we have, let's say, we have canteen costs. Canteen costs. So canteen costs, the basis for apportionment will be what? The number of what? Employees. So if it's 10,000 and accounting department has 10 employees and the marketing department has 20 employees. Marketing department has 20 employees. You don't expect the accounting department to pay equally as the marketing department, which has 20 employees, because definitely the marketing department are going to eat more than the accounting department. So the basis for sharing this canteen cost to be what? To be the number of what? Employees. So we add all the employees to get the total employees. Then we move to departments by. So when you move to accounting department, so let's say the total employees is 50. So now we are now apportioning, we are now sharing the canteen cost for the departments. Then we move to accounting department. In accounting department, we have 10 employees there. So for us to know the cost of canteen for the accounting department, then that will be the number of accounting employees, which is 10 over the total employees in the company, which is 10 over then times the cost of the canteen, which is what? 10,000. Then we cancel here, we cancel here, cancel here too. So that will give us what? 2,000. Very, very simple. So there are more you can research on them and get to know more about the overheads and their basis for apportionment. So don't worry, in my next video, I will bring practical questions and solve with you for you to get the whole concept of overheads and how to calculate, do your allocation, and also apportion overheads. So you don't need to worry. All what you have to do is click on the notification bell and subscribe to the channel. When this new video is uploaded, you'll be the first to be notified. That is very, very important. So don't worry, I'll bring questions in my next video. Let's move to the service department. Let's move to the service department when the company has service department. So this is where the reapportionment comes in. This is where the reapportionment comes in. So with the service department, they are only assisting the production department in producing the goods and services. They are assisting the production department in producing the goods and services. So if the service department incurs an overhead, if the service department incurs overheads, because they are just assisting the production department in producing their goods and services, after apportionment of the overheads, and now we have overheads for the service department, we need to reapportion the overheads of the service department to the production department. The service departments are only assisting the production department to produce goods and services. Therefore, they need not to have any production overheads. They need not to have what? Any production overheads. So after making your apportionment of the overheads, and now we see that the service department have overheads. After doing your apportionment, and now the service department have overheads, you have to reapportion the overheads that has been incurred by the service department to what? To the production department. And now the production department can have the total overheads of the cost unit, and now they can absorb it into the cost unit. It's very, very important for you to reapportion them to the production department. This will make us know the total overheads of the goods and services that we are producing. So if you don't reapportion, you don't get the exact total overheads for the product. So that is where the reapportionment comes in. That is where the reapportionment comes in. Let me take you through some of the purpose of distributing service department overheads. The purpose of distributing service department. So the purpose of distributing the overheads of the service department is to remind profit center managers about the existence of indirect what? Cost, to establish standard cost per unit for internal usage, to determine production cost accurately. For us to determine production costs accurately, if you don't reapportion it to the production department, then you cannot determine the accurate cost of what? Production. So that is it. I will also bring one full question. I hope you understand this part of the reapportionment. So that is the reapportionment. In my next video, I'll bring a question on how to reapportion. That is, we after solving the apportionment, then we reapportion the service department to the production department. Very, very simple. You just need to follow the channel so that you get the video. Then the last part that we are going to talk about is the overhead absorption. Is the overhead absorption. So when we talk about the overhead absorption, the overhead absorption is what we mean by after getting your total overhead. Now you absorb it into the what? The cost unit. That is, you share it. What the absorption here means is you share it to what? The cost unit or the product. You share it to what? The cost unit. That is the absorption. You absorb the overheads into the cost unit. That is the absorption. So overhead absorption is the spreading or sharing of overhead expenditure among the cost unit. So now you've done your allocation, you've done your apportionment, you've done your reapportionment. Now you have your total overheads. Now you absorb them among the units. So you have unit A, unit B, unit C. You absorb them into it. That is the absorption overhead. So as I said, allocation is where you charge the cost to only one unit or one cost center. And absorption Sorry, apportionment is where you share the overheads to different departments. Then when it comes to the absorption, absorption is where you spread or share the overheads among what the cost unit. That is the absorption. That is absorption. So then we have overhead absorption rates. Overhead absorption rate. So this one is also the rate, or just like the basis for apportionment. So the rate that we use to what? Absorb the overheads. The rate that we use to absorb the overheads. So with this one, it depends on the company. So to absorb overhead into the production cost, there are a number of approaches or methods to be adopted. Generally, there are six bases for overhead absorption, which are, so if you want to absorb the overheads, we have rates that you are supposed to use. So one, we have the direct material percentage. So you can decide to absorb the overheads using the direct material percentage. That is, it depends on the company. Also, you can use the direct labor percentage. You can also use the machine hour rate. You can also use the direct labor rate, and also you can also use the total units of production. Total units of production. So let me get them here for you. So overhead absorption rate. You can use the direct material percentage. So this one is just explanatory part of the topic. I'll bring the practical part of it, and you are going to appreciate this topic very well. Then we have, you can also use the direct labor percentage. You can also use the prime costs. So prime cost. So if you don't know prime cost is the summation of all direct costs. That is prime cost. That is the summation of the direct material, direct labor, and direct expenses. That is prime cost. Then you can also use the machine hour rate. The machine hour rate. Then you can also use the direct labor rate. Then you can also use the total units of production. So these are some of the rates that you use. But then mostly, if you are given a question, the question will tell you the absorption rate that you should use. The question will tell you the absorption rate that you should use. That is the OAR, the overhead absorption rate that you should use. So if the question tells you to use this particular absorption rate, the overhead absorption rate, you do as what the question says. That is all. So the next thing that I'm going to talk about is, okay, so let me explain how to get your overhead absorption rate. Overhead absorption rate. That is the OAR. So it is a simple formula, the overhead absorption rate. So the overhead absorption rate, the formula is the budgeted or estimated total overheads. Note this down. The budgeted total overheads over the total recommended base. This is the formula, simple. That is the total, that is the overhead absorption rate. So in some of the questions, you need the OAR to solve your question. That is where you need to find your overhead absorption rate. And for you to get your overhead absorption rate, it is your budgeted total overheads divided by the total recommended base. So the total recommended base is what the question is asking you to use as your what, as a basis for absorbing the overheads. So if the question is telling you to use the machine hour as machine hour as the basis, then it is the budgeted total overheads divided by the total machine hours. So when you divide this, then you get your OAR. That is the overhead absorption rate. Very, very simple. So I'm going to talk about the last part of this, which is the over and under absorption. Over and under absorption. So let me explain the concept of the under and over absorption of overheads. So when we talk about the under and over absorption of overheads, with the under with the under absorption, it occurs when overheads absorbed to production are less than the actual overheads. Are less than what the actual overhead. So if we know that the total overheads is what 10,000, or let's say thousand, and after absorbing this overheads to the production, we're able to absorb only 900. It means we've under absorbed production. We've under absorbed production. We've under absorbed production. What are some of the causes of this under absorption? It could be that there is inefficiency or there's what wastage. This can cause under absorption. So we budgeted that we are going to have overheads of what 10,000. By the end of the day, we are having 900. That is under absorption. We've absorbed less. So that means that is the under absorption. It could be that there was lower production than expected. There was lower production than expected. So if we expected to produce, let's say we expected to produce 500 units, but then at the end of the day, we produced only 450 units. Definitely our production will not reach, because this 500, this 1,000 overheads was budgeted for what 500. By the end of the day, we produced only what 450, which means it is likely that our overheads will not reach this 1,000. It will be what 900. So some of the causes of under absorption is what lower production than what expected. Also, it could be that we underestimated the overhead rate. It could be that we underestimated the overhead rate. So sometimes the rate that you use for your the that is the OAR that you used. The OAR that you used, you underestimated it. So if you underestimate it, the probability that you under absorbed overhead is also high. And also sometimes there is inefficiency, or there is what wastage. If there is wastage, then it means that there's going to be under absorption. And the over absorption is the vice versa of the under absorption. That is where your overheads absorbed to production are more than the actual overheads incurred. That is actual. That is that is the that is the overhead. So overhead absorption occurs when overheads absorbed to production exceed the actual overheads incurred. Exceed the actual overheads incurred. Exceed the actual overheads incurred. So that is it. So if the actual overheads incurred is 1,000, and at the end of the day, after absorbing these overheads into the production or the cost unit, we ended up having thousand, thousand and hundred, thousand and hundred. We have thousand and hundred. It means we've over absorbed our overheads. We've over absorbed our overheads. So this one can also be that there was higher production than expected. There was higher production as expected, and there was efficient use of resources, and also there was overestimated overhead rate. So that is all. So this is the theory part that I can give you for accounting for overheads. The exciting part is in the next video, which is the practical part where you'll be solving questions on how to calculate overheads, the allotment, the apportionment and reapportion, and also how to find the overhead absorption rate. Very, very interesting. So subscribe to the channel, like and share for your friends to also have a benefit of the channel. And I'll see you in my next video. Bye bye.